Hey guys, my name is Josh Hacko and I'm the Technical Director of NH Micro and Nicholas Hacko Watchmaker here in Sydney, Australia. And firstly, I'm very sorry that I'm not there with you guys in Chicago. I'd love to have been there, and I've got an intense bittersweet feeling about staying here at home. So as a bit of a preface, my wife, she's pregnant with some twin boys and she's going through a bit of a challenging time, and had to make the simultaneously very easy and very difficult decision to stay here in Sydney. So I hope you guys forgive me, but I'm going to do my best and try to share my story via video. And I've got a little presentation here. It's going to be a bit of a ramble, but I'm going to try my best to involve some audiovisual stuff that maybe I couldn't have shared in person, just to describe our journey specifically with Kern, but more about high precision and ultra high precision manufacturing. So my prezo is entitled Breeding Kangaroos on the Top of Mont Blanc, and it's kind of cheekily titled, but it revolves around how my dad and I almost accidentally started one of the highest precision workshops in Australia. And if I was to do it again, if I went back in time and started this journey all from the start, it would be as difficult as breeding a kangaroo on the top of Mont Blanc. And you'll see as I just tell the story, I guess, that we were green, more than green. We were just seeds, basically, not even trees and saplings, but we somehow made it. And hopefully that gives you guys some inspiration that if we could do it here in Australia and the corner of the world, that maybe you guys in America and Germany and wherever else you're from, you're more than able to. As I said, my name is Josh and I'm a fourth generation watchmaker. And I also run a ultra high precision job shop called NH Micro that services parallel precision industries. So we have these two companies that operate from the same workshop here in Sydney, Australia, and we have about 180-ish square meters of factory, so very tight, and of that about 95 to 100 square meters of factory floor, the rest being storage and office space. So that's about 1,000 square feet. So we packed in a lot of stuff in 1,000 square feet, and we predominantly started off, at least, making watches. That was our core business. So we built a workshop around watchmaking, fairly vertically integrated. We do everything from design, aesthetic design, mechanical design, manufacturing, assembly, adjustment, hand finishing, and then sales and after-sales service for our watchmaking company. And over time, that sort of attracted the attention of local industries that were parallel to watchmaking, so the medical sector, aerospace, scientific instrumentation, all these different sort of high need sectors, I guess, was the best way to I guess that, they all have very high needs. And we started serving those industries, and over time, we realized that maybe there's a bit of a market here, and started up NH Micro. So out of watchmaking, NH Micro is born, and today, sort of 3/4 of the way through 2025, NH Micro is about 80% of our business, and the watchmaking business is still strong and still growing, but we've just experienced a huge demand for ultra high precision products that need, I guess, something close to a watchmaker's touch. Breeding kangaroos on the top of Mont Blanc. Just imagine this. You're a refugee. You've just come from a war-torn country from Eastern Europe, and you land in Australia, and you have only one thing that's really transferable. You have a bit of cash, not much, very little in fact, and 3 suitcases, 2 of which arrive, 1 gets lost in transit, and a trade. You're a watchmaker. So you're my dad. I'm just basically describing my dad. And you arrive in Sydney with your trade to practice, which is watch repair and overhaul and service, and maybe a little bit of buying and selling. And you grow a small generational family business, which focuses in on buying and selling Swiss high-grade watches and servicing and overhauling those same watches for, I guess, the local Australian market. And you do that very successfully. Dad was a very successful watchmaker in the colloquial sense of the word, in the watch repairer sense of the word, and still is to this day. But things start to change in 2009, and I'm going to use a lot of auto analogies here. So car analogies, it's very relatable, at least I think. But Dad's basically a car mechanic for watches. And in 2009, he starts to notice that large Swiss watch brands, and in this analogy would be like the Fords and maybe the GMs and the I guess the big players in whichever industry, they started to restrict the supply of spare parts to independent repairers. And this is a story I think that resonated all throughout America with the right to repair movement. But this was a little bit before that. So in 2009, Dad noticed a shift. And I'm not going to mention any specific brands, but I'm sure if you do any digging, you'll be able to find the main culprits. But long story short, the large Swiss, predominantly watchmakers, stopped supplying spare parts to independent watch repairers like my dad. And that would be like Ford or GM or whoever, not allowing your local mechanic to purchase a spark plug or a windscreen wiper, or maybe a set of piston seals, piston ring seals, or maybe a head gasket. Whatever the spare part might be, the restriction of the spare parts monopolizes the after-sales market. So 2009, these one or two of these large Swiss watchmakers basically shut down long-term, long-standing spare parts accounts in Sydney. Dad had some of these accounts and was no longer able to buy just the simplest of seals to repair a watch. And repairing a watch is very similar to repairing a car. If you don't have one seal, you can't really perform a service. So this all culminates in 2011, 2 years of sort of struggling through and eroding spare part supplies that we had or Dad had on hand. It all culminates in 2011 when these same watch companies completely restrict the supply of spare parts and send out a bunch of letters terminating every single spare parts account in Sydney and in Australia. And this also spread internationally. The US wasn't too far behind. Australia was what we think like a bit of a testing ground. It was a small enough market that, and we're not litigious enough to cause big issues, but we experienced the full force of, I guess, large corporations squeezing small players. At that time, I was around 14 or so years old, half-ish way through high school, and my dad had a conversation with one of the spare parts accounts managers for all of Australia. In fact, he was the service manager for all of Australia for one of these watch companies. And he says, my son, he's showing a bit of interest in watchmaking, and which is true. I was doing watchmaking during the holidays with Dad. So what if I send him to Switzerland, and what if he trains there in the most prestigious Swiss watchmaking school, and he does his 4 years there. He does an internship or some sort of work placement at one of the big Swiss companies, and he returns to Australia with basically the Swiss level of knowledge and expertise. And then to top it all off, let's invest in some high-grade service and overhaul machinery, so the best cleaning machines and the best screwdrivers and so on, and outfit and a workshop specifically catered to watch repair and overhaul to Swiss standards. What if we did all of that? Would you supply spare parts to us at that point? And the answer was unequivocally no. And it was no Australian watchmaker will ever be good enough to repair our watch. And my dad's an Eastern European sort of tough-skinned guy, and I just remember coming home really seeing the full force of his seething corporate rage, right? And yeah, I guess it lights a fire. That sort of sentence lights a fire that is very difficult to extinguish. So instead of keeling over and basically allowing 1/3 of his business to die, which was the service and overhaul, Dad says, I'm going to prove everyone wrong, and I'm going to make my own watch. Really exercise the full meaning of that word, watchmaker. Not just watch repairer, but watchmaker. And if I can make my own watch, I can definitely repair anyone's watch. And that's the sort of the overkill that only an angry Eastern European can really execute on. And the equivalent in this auto analogy is that your local mechanic suddenly decides to start an F1 team. And we didn't know that. And that's what I mean when I say that we were green. We did not know how difficult it would be to breed this kangaroo on the top of Mont Blanc and to make a watch, not just from scratch, not just with a small team, but also in Australia. Probably the least hospitable place for watchmaking. So we underwent that journey, and 10 years later we've got a watch, and we've had lots of twists and turns along the way, but really it's a huge underlining of Dad's determination to really start up a manufacturing industry from scratch in a country that never would have thought to have supported such an industry. So maybe some context as well of how industry happens in Switzerland, and maybe you guys have some insight as well into how Swiss watchmaking works. It's not an uncommon story as well, so you might see it in other parts of industrialization, but it's really an embodiment of cottage industry. So it's very rare for one watchmaker to manufacture every single part of the watch. There are parts that are pretty different and require a lot of expertise. And it would be like a car manufacturer making the buttons that you click on your dash, or like the levers and the switches, all the way to boring out engine blocks to receive high performance pistons. And it's a huge disparity of mechanical components in a watch. And this cottage industry approach in Switzerland was really common. You had Swiss farmers, basically, that were able to work during the summer and then during the winter specialize in on a specific craft. It might be making a spring, or it might be drilling out a series of holes in a piece of brass to accept the gears and jewels and bearings. And the Swiss watchmaking industry developed in such a way that you had these pockets of specialization, and only very recently, did large Swiss companies conglomerate and purchase all of these small suppliers to vertically integrate their manufacturing process. And so out of complete naivety, we thought we would do it all from scratch. So we bought a Swiss turning machine for small diameter parts from Citizen, and then, maybe I shouldn't say that, but it's not going to steal any Kern sales. We bought a Citizen machine, we bought a Makino wire EDM machine, and then we bought a Kern milling machine. And there's lots of stories about how that all came about, but Dad basically said to himself that he's not going to retire, and spent all of his cash, his retirement cash, on starting up this workshop. So that's where our journey with Kern started. I know it's a bit late in the game, we're like maybe 20 minutes in or so, and I'm only just mentioning Kern properly, but I didn't even know what a milling machine was, and the first thing I bought to make milling parts was a Kern Pyramid Nano. So we really fell headfirst into what manufacturing was. And from a technical perspective, it was like an HSK 25 machine, so tiny little itty bitty tool holders, little itty bitty tools as well, and like a fairly advanced machine control with a Heidenhain, and a very complex machine. So it had pneumatic systems and a hydraulic system and a hydrostatic system, and it was a second-hand machine, so all these systems started yelling at you. They started presenting problems fairly early on in our ownership of the machine. And again, looking back in hindsight's 2020, I probably should have just bought a brand new machine. But we learned a lot. And that was, again, another underline or underscore in our journey. We were just so sponge-like in our learning, partly because we had no choice. We'd made all these investments in cash and we didn't really want it to go to waste. So we had to learn. So I'll tell a story actually about how we got in touch with Kern. We sent off a bunch of emails to people that we thought made high precision machines, and it was mainly based off of their YouTube videos. It's like, oh, they've put up a YouTube video and you can see a watch part. Well, that machine must be able to make watches. So we sent off all these emails, and Kern kind of they replied, but they were really confused as to why there was an inquiry from Australia from like a @hotmail.com email address. And honestly, I kind of forgive all the other machine tool suppliers for not replying when Kern kind of accidentally did, maybe. And they said, oh, well, Mr. Hacko, this is the catalog, and you can feel free to ask any questions, and didn't really think much of it. And about 2 or 3 months later in 2016, maybe October-ish, Dad and I said, well, there's no use just sitting in Australia. Let's go to Germany, to this fair called AMB in Stuttgart, to really understand what these machines are, to see how big they are, and can we fit them in our 2-car garage that doesn't have 3-phase power or a slab or air conditioning or whatever. Like what's the mechanical and physical constraint of setting up a workshop? So we went to this show, and this was at the same time where we started buying all the other machines. But I met up with one of the Kern salesmen called Udo, who handles the Asia Pacific market, and he said, why don't you come over to Murnau or to Eschenlohe, which is about like a 4-hour or 5-hour train ride from Stuttgart. He said, why don't you come over and tour the factory, see what you think and all the rest. And at this time, I didn't even know how much a machine cost. But he was very gracious, and he met me at the train station in Munich and drove me down to the contract manufacturing workshop and the factory, and I toured around, and it was just like information overload. I'd just spent 3 days at a machine tool fair, and this was happening right in front of my eyes, and I'd never even seen a Kern machine, and suddenly I was, there was like 40 of them around. So the sort of providential nature of it was that experience stuck in my mind, to the extent where about 5 months later, I returned to Stuttgart to do some training on the Citizen lathe that we bought. And at that time, I said, well, I'll pop over to Switzerland, and it's just close enough, I guess, and we'll see some secondhand machine tool vendors, and see what Kern machines they have. And there was a secondhand machinery tool vendor in La Chaux-de-Fonds, which is the watchmaking hub of Switzerland. And I walk in and I see this huge Pyramid Nano machine. It's white and red. And I said, well, I'm pretty sure that I saw one of these at Kern. And I heard that it's pretty precise, and I think I need precise parts for a watch. The Citizen guys keep telling me that I need a milling machine as well. I thought I could do everything on this 4mm Swiss lathe. Well, turns out I need a milling machine too. Well, what's the deal with this one? And the machine tool dealer turns around to me and says, oh, well, this is an ex-Rolex machine. And I said, oh, wow, ex-Rolex, that sounds fun. And if you read between the lines, we didn't have a fantastic relationship with Rolex at that time. They told us some unsavory things, and we said, well, if it was good enough for Rolex, it might be good enough for us too. So I call out my dad, and I said, I think this is the right machine. It says Kern on it, and it says Rolex on it at the back. Maybe we should buy it. And sure enough, we placed the order that afternoon, and about 6 or 7 months later, we're installing the machine in Australia. And that's sort of where the journey kicks off. We learn a lot. We break a lot of tools. We waste a lot of material. We do a lot of like eBay and YouTube and Reddit corporate espionage, trying to find out like what tools other people use and this and that. And about 2 years later, we cook up a watch. actually less than 2 years. It was about 18 months later we release a watch. That means we'd done the production and everything. We learned so much from that first watch. It was called the NH1. And that watch basically taught us how to make a watch. And at that stage, it was about 40% of the components, maybe 50% of the components were made in our workshop. And that was sort of like maybe the lowest hanging fruit. And to get another 10% or 20%, 30% of the components would have required a lot of time, and it has. So we're up to maybe 85, 90% of the components, and it's taken a hot minute. So the only takeaway that I can really draw from that experience, that starting experience, was that we were too green to even understand the mess we were getting ourselves into. The money, the time, the sleepless nights. I mean, there's a video deep on our watchmaking Instagram of me wearing my pajamas in the workshop, and it's security camera footage of my dad logging into the online security, like the cloud-based security camera, and recording me at 2 a.m. making watch parts. And I was just so fervent, and still am, so fervently obsessed with making something that's like a pursuit for perfection, or like some sort of very precise, intricate thing. And the beautiful thing about, I guess, the naivety that we had is that we didn't know when to say no. We didn't know when to say stop. This is beyond our capability. We had no, it was so far beyond our capability that everything should have been no. So everything became yes. And the caveat that I should pose to that is that we had two other businesses that were sort of supporting our watchmaking business to stand up. And that was sort of servicing and buying and selling these high-grade Swiss mechanical watches. If we were trying to do this on the turnover alone of starting up a watch, it would be impossible. Or at the very least, much, much slower. But things started to move. We started to sell watches, and we started to build a bit of a local market. And at that time, we'd also had a bit of exposure to what it felt like getting a drawing, making a component, and then measuring that component to the best of your ability and putting it into a watch and seeing it work. So we saw that chain, and as soon as these parallel precision industries started knocking on our doors, I felt maybe it was suppressed for sure, but I felt that we could help, that we could somehow offer some small element of expertise. Like we had done something difficult, making a watch, and maybe it was transferable to something else. So, and I'm really just jumping around a bunch in the chronology, but the real turning point for us was at the start of 2019, 2020. And we got a knock on the door from a local manufacturer who was making telescopes, of all things. So it was a university that made spectrographs and optical instrumentation for star observation, astronomical observation. And this team of scientists and engineers and instrument makers and tool makers were making these very high precision, one-off bespoke spectrographs and scientific instruments. And they said, well, we think we know that you guys, these ragtag watchmakers, we think you guys can make something precise, and you certainly have proved yourself by making a watch. Why don't you give it a shot to make these I guess high precision optical and optomechanical devices. And at that time we probably weren't ready to do contract manufacturing work, but it started us on this slow trickle of a journey. And one job became two, and then two jobs became five, and suddenly we had a small pipeline of extracurricular activities. Like these parts that weren't watchmaking parts at all, but had the same features. They were precise, and they were complex, and they were usually quite small. And so these three things we started identifying. You had precise parts, complex parts, and these very, very small parts. They defined a watchmaking component, and we'd learned how to do that. So if something was just precise, or just precise and small, or just precise and complex, or maybe even all three of these things, we had a pretty good grasp of how to attack it. and only because we'd made so many mistakes on our own stuff. And the engineers from these basically labs started, switching jobs and moving to one job and another job, and soon we developed some sort of customer list of people, mainly local people who needed high precision mechanical devices. So I've talked a lot about the origin story of the watchmaking business and just touched on how NH Micros started to get pulled into contract manufacturing. But there's been a few inflection points in the business, and without talking about every single step and every single job, I'll hone in on some of these inflection points because I think they're quite interesting, trying to look back. And I've been very retrospective in the last maybe 3 or 4 days as I've really tried to prepare for this. And I can hone in on a few key moments that NH Micro, as a contract manufacturing business, changed. And one of those moments was when we bought our Micro HD. And this, looking back, was probably the most visionary decision that my dad made. We had some issues with the Pyramid Nano that were kind of starting to get a bit annoying. We'd booked in enough work for our own internal watchmaking work as well as our external sort of client-facing work, that the Pyramid Nano became a staple in our manufacturing process. And every time it was down for a week or 2 weeks or even months, it would really, really hurt. So I distinctly remember we had an issue with a chilling unit and it basically wasn't working. One of the pumps had failed and the new pump was like 2 weeks away and maybe a week of backwards and forwards between customs and shipping and install. So around 3 weeks of downtime. And I had my head in my hands rather, and I went to Dad and said, look, this is just not working. Something, we need contingency. Do we buy like a cheaper machine that feeds the Pyramid Nano? And he sort of just said, what's the best machine that Kern makes? That was his response. And I am eternally grateful to have a dad like that had, idea. And I didn't even want to buy the best machine that Kern had. I was a precision geek, but I was not ready for that level of perceived risk. But he thought about it differently. And it's taken a few years for me to understand. But he recognized that the team that we were building, so now we have about, I think, 10 people between the two companies, but the team that we were building was capable. And to take that team to the next level, you needed a resource to pull and ultimately push the team to places that the current equipment set couldn't take them. So he said, yeah, what's the best machine that Kern makes? And at that time, the Micro HD had sort of been out for about a year, 2 years, or maybe, 2 years. And we started the process of speccing out a, Micro HD. And that really changed NH Micro completely, because now every single watch component was well within reach, or every single milled watch component was well within reach. It was already well within reach on the Pyramid Nano, but maybe we could make some larger parts, like a case, for example, and also stabilize the high precision components, like the main plates and bridges in the watch that have very, very tight tolerances, that the Pyramid Nano needed longer times to warm up and maybe some love and tender love and care to really get the max out of it. The HD would just do it in its breeze, in a breeze. But it opened up a door for contract manufacturing where we could start to rely on the machine. So a brand new piece of equipment was one thing, and then rely on an ultra high precision machine, to the extent that all the metrology that we had at that point was like rendered useless. There was just no way that we could measure the parts coming off of the machine. So tangibly, what that meant was that our existing customer base now had access to a very, very high precision machine, and our future customer base that was attracted by that machine. Some customers come to you because you have some level of expertise. You are known to be the best metal to glass seal supplier, and you're really good at that. Or maybe you make nylon string and for fishing, and you're just like the best at that. But some customers come to you because they know how their product should be manufactured, and should be manufactured on a very, very high-end machine, and they start looking for high-end machines and start looking for vendors with high-end machines. In a similar way that I would look for a wire cut part to be manufactured by someone with a wire cutter, and a turned part to be manufactured by someone with XYZ turning machine. So we started to get customers that knew that we had purchased this micro HD, and started coming to us. Can you make this part? Can you make that part? And it was very exciting, incredibly exciting, and we sort of said yes to everything. That naivety was still as strong. I think that naivety is still here, because I am saying yes to a lot of projects. But I've also learned where the limits are, and that's been good. That's been very, very positive. And alongside that sort of new machine, so stability in production and uplifting capability, we'd really started to access the knowledge, the institutional knowledge that Kern had about making these high precision parts, whether that was the types of tools, the types of strategies, the types of work holding, all these things that you might not ever learn yourself, or if you did try to learn yourself, would cost a lot of money and time. We started accessing that by buying basically a brand new machine and getting deep into the application side of Kern. So yeah, this was, I would say, like one of the biggest turning points for NH Micro. Before that, NH Micro almost didn't exist, and the machine that took NH Micro to where it is today, as 80% of our revenue, is that machine. The second big inflection point that we felt was, it might not have been second chronologically, but in order of importance, the second biggest one was us purchasing our measuring equipment. So our CMM came about, it would be maybe 18 months ago, roughly, let's say. We bought the machine 18 months ago, and it's a Zeiss CMM, optical and tactile CMM. It's an O-Inspect 322, and that really transformed our ability to market ourselves as an ultra-precision solutions provider. Up until that point, we had, I guess, general metrology capability, profile projectors, your surface plate metrology, your hand tool metrology, pin gauges, bore gauges, air gauges, LVDTs, things that are still used daily today. But having an ultra-capable metrology platform suddenly validated the results that were coming off the HD. And this really brings me into this overarching theme that I wish I had talked about earlier in the Prezzo, but it's that precision is a chain. And you might have heard this before. Precision is a chain, and it's governed by the weakest link in that chain. In that chain, you have everything from your facility, so your environment, whether that's the vibration coming through the floor, your temperature, your humidity, your temperature delta, the temperature shift between the roof, your ceiling, and your floor. Like, oh, got some thunder. It's, by the way, it's bucketing here, so if you hear some noise in the background, it's so yeah, you've got the temperature delta vertically, temperature delta spatially, temperature delta temporally. Then you have things like your program. So what CAM software are you using? Is it capable enough to generate 3D surfaces, or is it fast enough to process complex 5-axis toolpaths? And then you have some more tangible things like your work holding, your tool holding, the tools that you use, and finally the metrology. And there's a lot of links in that chain. There's a lot of little tiny links that you might not spend a lot of time thinking about, like your coolant, for example, that all impact the strength of this chain. And one big thing that we solved very early on by partnering with Kern was the machine. The machine is often the weakest link in the chain, especially if you machining big parts and suddenly you start to have to make small parts or precise parts or complex parts. These sort of general machines stop being able to perform. But purchasing a Kern as your first milling machine solves that very, very quickly, and it doesn't become the weakest link. And you become the weakest link, and you have to push yourself to really maximize the capability and eventually capacity of the machine. So this chain that we've developed at NH Micro, the inflection points in the business are really the uplifts in the weakest links of the chain. So now, I think maybe 5 years into running NH Micro, we still have weak links in the chain. Now it's things like capacity planning. How do you make sure that the machines are well utilized? How do you get really efficient at automating the machine? What kind of safety do you put into your standard operating procedures so that the machine's safely automated? It's not just running parts that can crash the machine. Is your post well customized so that it's doing tool breakage detection? And when it does tool breakage detection, does it put everything back to where it's supposed to be? And are your planes reset? And all these small things become your weakest link. And I would say, as I said, overall with NH Micro, we're not thinking about the machine. We're not thinking about the tool holders. We're not thinking about things like the coolant. Work holding is always tricky. I don't profess to be an expert at that. But partnering with someone like Kern teaches you at a very base level of what type of chain you should be looking at. What type of tool holder you should pair with an ultra high precision milling machine. And you can see on our Instagram, we're pretty open about a lot of stuff on our Instagram, except for maybe the customer parts with the NDAs, but how we make those parts is pretty clear. You try to use the best possible version of every single link. I also wanted to speak a little bit about, and this is getting more and more technical, so forgive me, but I think most of you enjoy the technical stuff. I wanted to speak a little bit about the transition between something like a Pyramid Nano, which was designed 20 plus years ago, and something like the Micro HD, and why that's important for a business that's constantly changing parts. So the Pyramid Nano is an incredibly accurate machine after the second day of operation. After 24 hours and really into the 48th hour plus, the machine hits this plateau of stability. So it's a very large machine. It's made from a steel construction. The hydrostatics are great, but they put a lot of oil that needs to be cooled into places where maybe it's not cooled well enough. It's also a 3-axis machine. We have a trunnion, a 4 and 5 axis attachment to the machine. And it really is an attachment. And it's sort of closer to a modern day jig borer or jig grinder than it is to a high precision 5-axis milling machine. And I feel kind of comfortable saying that because we've used it now for almost 10 years and figured out how to extract the absolute maximum from the machine and also where it falls down. And if you're making the same part over and over again and you never turn the machine off and your room's really well air conditioned and you have, a stable tool life and tool sort of management procedure, it's great. It's a fantastic machine and it taught us every single thing we know. However, the big step change with something like a micro platform machine is that suddenly you're not waiting 48 hours for the machine to cool down. You're waiting 20 minutes, 10 minutes, and you're reaching that plateau of stability after 10, 20 minutes. You suddenly have access to a much more rigid 5-axis platform that's designed to be a 5-axis platform, not a jig borer with an attachment on it. And then the quality of life things, having this huge tool changer cabinet that you can open up, change tools out, pick up a whole rack and start changing those tools out offline. You could do some of those things on the Pyramid Nano, but it was not really an ergonomic solution. And it's weird, I'm not trying to sell the machine. You guys, half of you probably own them already, but what I'm trying to illustrate is that for NH Micro, if we didn't have that, if we didn't have the stability and the ability to change between micro machining and LSR mold for a cochlear implant, all the way to a waveguide for satellite communication, all the way to roughing out aluminium enclosures for gyroscope housings, and then XY. If we didn't have a machine that could sort of stress that chain for us and not break, NH Micro wouldn't exist. So in that I guess chain, it's abundantly clear that my dad's decision now 4 years ago was visionary. The only issue is I don't think he thinks it's visionary because he doesn't even know how to turn the machine on. But he knew that we just needed to access the best link in the chain. And maybe it became visionary because we partnered with some of the best people in the industry. So I'm rambling way too much, and this is probably as good a spot as any to wrap it up. And thank you very much for all your attention and your listening and your patience. And I might just wrap it up with some key takeaways. The first being that you should always invest in the best possible gear. Strengthen that chain, that precision chain as much as possible, because it always pays dividends. Being an expert in your field and relying on the best possible equipment to give you the best possible result is something that is always highly regarded by your customers. And that's, we've evidenced that with NH Micro to a certain extent. And I'm sure you guys, all you Kern owners, know what that feels like. When you have this strong precision chain, your customers love that, whether you're your own customer or external customers in a job shopping environment. And the second thing is, it's probably a little bit more ambiguous, but stay green. I think looking back, we've really benefited from not knowing our limitations and trying and just attempting stuff that most people would never. And who knows, maybe there is an outcome that is not the status quo. So stay green to be able to really learn quickly. And I guess if we knew how difficult it was to breed a kangaroo on the top of Mont Blanc, we would have never tried. So our watch is maybe the strongest testament of that. And what we do with NH Micro just builds. So again, thank you so much for listening to my little presentation, my little rant. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon full of great discussion and technical geekery. Thanks so much. It's been real. Bye.